Hello and welcome to another episode of The Page Burners. We are working our way through the Malazan books. We are reading about 100 pages every week. We have just wrapped up Deadhouse Gates, and we're going to be talking today full series spoilers as it pertains to stuff that we read in Deadhouse Gates. So you may go to stuff that happens in later books too, but largely I think things that seem different or reveal a lot more information to us about what happens later in the series. Um, that happened in Deadhouse Gates as we made our way through it. We will be talking about those today, things that we couldn't discuss with um, in the non-spoiler, non-full series spoiler discussions. We have the other Malazan veterans here. Shannon will be joining us in a bit. He's having some audio troubles, but Jarrod, how are you? Could you start by introducing yourself?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm Jarrod at the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel, and also on the Speculative Speculation podcast and other fine podcasts on pagechewing.com.
I'm Carl, and you can find me just on Page Chewing. If you really wanted, you could hunt me down somewhere on social media. But my book, Truth of Crowns, is out there and is readable. And yeah, I'm excited to be here talking the whole series.
Excellent. So let's get started. What are the top spoiler things you guys wanted to discuss? I have a list of topics, but if there are any burning things you want to start with.
Oh man, there's so much I want to talk about. Fellison definitely is a big one.
Yes.
Um,
About
the
Felicity.
writing. Yeah, please go ahead.
I think this is. I guess we'll do Deadhouse Gates and Gardens of the Moon full series spoilers. We didn't do one of these for Gardens of the Moon, but there was a deck of the dragons reading. I think it was in Gardens of the Moon, which told us about blood that will face each other or something. Man, I don't remember the phrasing of that already. But the upcoming confrontation between Felicin and Tavor was foreshadowed in one of the Deck of Dragons readings. That was really cool, especially the phrasings of all of that.
Wow.
Absolutely. And then we also get in Gardens, Gano's. We're told that his, you have to pay a life for a life, right? And it's it's easy on your first read to interpret that as being, maybe his dad or someone else out there. But it's Fellison, right? And as far as I know, Erikson's even confirmed it, that it's actually planting that seed way back in Gardens for the payoff in House of Chains. And we're really just getting to see her story here, and oh my god, it's so heartbreaking with the context of everything, knowing where she ends up. It's just it's bleak. Her whole story is really bleak.
Yeah, it really is. Oh, we can't. You're muted, Varsha.
I'm sorry. I think yeah, I thought of Felicin when we started with um the life for a life. I thought uh and I like the sort of what is the word I'm looking for? Bait and switch, I guess, or no, I don't think that's the right term, but making us think that it is the dad there, which it could be for first time readers, but actually it's Felicin. And yeah, that but she doesn't, well, I guess she does die in the fourth book. So yeah.
It's an interesting.
Hmm.
I think it is a bait and switch in some ways, and a red herring, whatever literary
Mm.
term you want to use. But it's the payoff is great and heartbreaking. Especially just knowing like she's like she never even gets to like fully grow up, like she's still like a teenager when she dies. And I'm reading this wonderful book. I was talking about it with Jarrod before we started recording, Fallen Ascent. Definitely recommend people go look it up. Don't have it with me, and I'm blanking on the author's name. Matthew Wood or Michael Wood, something like that.
Michael
Uh,
Woods, yeah.
Michael Woods, and he's written this lengthy treatise basically on the Malazan Book of the Fallen and the way Carl Jung's process of individuation plays out over the course of all 10 books, rather than it being like, Carl Jung, like for people who don't know, was a psychologist, psychotherapist, and philosopher, really. And he identified these archetypes, he called them, that recur throughout human history across civilizations, east, west, wherever. And he also explored a lot kind of the unconscious, and how it influenced humanity, kind of the our instincts and our shadow sides. And it's really cool getting to see this intellectual go through, read the series through that lens and explore the series through that lens. And it maps really neatly onto a lot. Like I was talking to Jarrod about how shocked I was, how, Erikson expressed how he did not like intentionally write this to be, to follow Jungian archetypes, and the kind of patterns and um, individuation process as thought up by Carl Jung, but it does fall really neatly into it. And Fellison, is a great example of someone who, so much of what she struggles with is relevant, and her internal battle is made external, which I think a lot of the best fiction does that. And so it then, makes it easier to kind of map onto these psychological archetypes, right? Where she is, finding her, like, these missing masculine figures, and the men around her, and how that's like manifesting itself in her own sort of neuroses. And I don't want to get like overly into it, because there's a whole book you should read, with a lot of really interesting essays and insights. But and if you haven't read Carl Jung before, it's very accessible. The author defines all the terminology and kind of explains everything as you go along. So in that ways, it's kind of a good primer for people who maybe haven't read Jung but have read the Book of the Fallen, and they can learn about this very influential psychologist. Anyway, Allison's arc is just fascinating, is what I'm getting at, and the way that she definitely reads as a very psychologically real person, and how, frankly, how horrible she can be, right? And how self-destructive, but how there is this like little girl, this innocent deep inside her, the child yearning to be safe and free, and every decision she makes over the course of her journey leads, is motivated by that ultimately.
Yeah.
What were you saying, Jarrod?
Did you guys, because this is both your second time reading it, right? So did you guys find on the second read, like I did, a lot more sympathy for Fellison than on the first read?
I think I honestly fell in about the same. I was one of the weirdos who, like, I felt like I actually always kind of just felt bad for her. Like, I was annoyed with her. I would always get annoyed with how terrible she would be, and I never blamed people who, like, hated her, because she is really unlikable. But I always just kind of felt like I just felt bad for her. I felt pity for her. And so I think in that way, I knowing her journey didn't necessarily completely reframe the way I read her story, because I had always viewed her as like a very tragic figure. And unfortunately, her story is just all it is tragedy.
Yeah. Well, I think in many cases it's easy the first time around to focus on how horrible she is.
Yeah.
And for me, the second time around, I already kind of had that in my head. I already knew that about her. And so I was looking for something different. And I got it, because she is a very, a very well-rounded character. And there's many, many facets to her that come out along the course of the story, and so that's always a fascinating thing to me, and it's amazing how much her story resonates beyond even House of Chains,
Yeah.
because it plays right up until the end of the Cripple God. It really is a
One of the,
factor, is a
yeah,
main factor.
that's
In
one of the
the
best scenes in the series, I have to say, is when that reunion of Tavor and Ganos, and I couldn't find her, I couldn't save her, whatever she
Yeah,
says,
it made me
and
cry
finally,
twice.
yes, she finally
So,
like collapses and just breaks
yeah,
down. It's, I mean, one of the best scenes I've ever read. Just the
ever,
payoff
yeah,
there is
yeah.
phenomenal. I'm sorry, what Varsha, what about you? What was your experience like with Fellison on a second read?
To remember how I felt the first time, because I don't think I don't remember disliking her. I feel like I had a significant distance from her. Like it was like I was looking at her from a distance, trying to understand. And I feel like there is every time I started to dislike her at something she says, I feel like there's something in those sections to sort of tug you back from that. Like the time when I forget, she says something horrible when someone gets hurt, and Heberick says, "Oh, I wish I had your armor," and she thinks that, well, no one will know if I'm bleeding inside the armor, right? So there are a lot of powerful statements like that that I think anchored me. I felt solidly neutral about her the first time around, if I remember correctly. And the second time, I just felt horrible for her the whole time. And yes, it is very, very difficult to not be annoyed, but at everything she says. But those anchoring points were still there to sort of pull you back and say, well, she's hurting, so maybe think about this differently. Um, so yeah, I think like you, Carl, feel I didn't feel too differently the second time around, except maybe felt slightly more sad knowing that oh, the revenge that she wants to build herself up to, how that doesn't really even pay out fully, which is like fine.
Yeah,
I guess and I felt less angry at Tavor too, because I knew that she was trying to protect her. But um yeah, net,
yeah,
I think similar overall.
because we don't get too much of Tavor in this book, right? If I remember
No, we
correctly.
don't. In fact, we only see her once through Felison's eyes when she's in the prologue, when she's being led to um to the boat,
Oh, okay, and that
and
was it.
then there's just a lot of mention of Tavor coming for
Right.
vengeance.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Yeah. Because isn't that funny though? How there's not that much mention of Tavor in here,
Yeah.
uh, except through other people's eyes, and the whole series is through other people's eyes when it comes to her. But
Mm,
how much of a main character she becomes after this is incredible, and Fellison is really the linchpin for that. It's really the key that brings all that out.
yeah. And it's interesting also how this, I don't know if this is true for you guys too, but it subverted some of my expectations. Like when we still had about, what, 50, 60 pages left, and the last 4 or 5 chapters, I think, there started being mention of Tavor and how she's gonna come save the day and wreak vengeance on these guys for what they did to Coltane. But then we never see her, which I didn't expect that. I thought there'd be like one big final battle where Tavor comes and saves the day, so to speak. But that didn't happen, and we don't see her again until the fourth book, and that again starts with some trudging along to get to where we need to go, which was interesting. Yeah, I didn't expect that the first time.
I think on the first time, I probably also expected there to be a confrontation at the end of the first book. Yeah, overall, I would say on my first read, Felicin story and Haborik and Bowden was actually one of the stories I really emotionally connected with. I hated Bowden and I liked Haborik, and Felicin I pitied. And I think Haborik, I was always kind of waiting for the ball to drop and to find out something horrible, or for him to do what Bowden did and sleep with Felicin, and he never does that. And knowing the context of the full series, I am much more comfortable in my love for him, flawed as he is. And then Bowden, actually, I was much more sympathetic to this time. You probably wouldn't notice it if you just listened to our conversations, but knowing his story and who he is better and like where all of that goes, it made me much more sympathetic to him. Where I think I very much saw him as Felicin saw him my first time through. I fell for the unreliable narrator there. And it doesn't help again that we're introduced to him decapitating an innocent woman, right? And then, when you're beginning to like think that maybe he's on Felicin's side, he then sleeps with her. And that whole scene is still hard for me to process, although I understand it much better now about what's happening here. On the first time through, I couldn't wrap my head around it, and I just thought he was being a monster and taking advantage of her. And there's a lot of what I've gotten, I think, is noticing kind of the actions behind the actions, or the deeper motivations, what's really going on behind the scenes, because it is so densely layered here. And you do pick up so much more in this time through. Tavor is an interesting character because I don't know if either I had gone into it with kind of the mindset of like, well, I know this series is going to try to subvert my expectations. People talk about it. It's really complex. So I should know Tavor is not what she seems like at face value. Or if I literally had it spoiled for me that Tavor was like one of the major characters and was like awesome and blah blah blah, but I never hated her. I always was like, there's more going on. So even from that first chapter of Deadhouse Gates, I was like, she's in some way trying to help Felicin and is like caught between a rock and a hard place. And the unfortunate truth is, I think she fucked up majorly, and this is probably her single biggest mistake in the whole series, was sending Felicin to the mines. I think she should have smuggled her out and risked the consequence, done something. I guess we don't see it from her perspective exactly what her decision making is. We only kind of understand the logic of like, she was worried that she had to do there had to be some sort of sacrifice, given that Ganos rebelled, and they were going to do this Call of the Nobility. But it was just a bad decision. It was a bad decision, and it just led to tragedy.
But what's the source of that decision? That brings us back to Lysine, because Lysine is the one going through with this Call of the Nobility, and you don't find out any of her reasons for that until much later in the series as well. And of course, she's the big bad emperor through much of this, and then you do get a different perspective of her as well. And I think that's pretty consistent with pretty much every character you come across in this book, in that you're not getting the full story. You're getting Lysine's responsible for Tavor's actions because Tavor's trying to outwit her in some way, and you get she's culling the nobility. But who really started that before Lysine?
Kellanved, yeah.
Kellanved
The big
did.
K.
The big K.
Big K.
And of course we find out in this book, who they are. But and then for series spoilers, we do we find out a lot about Kellanved and Dancer and what they were trying to accomplish in a bigger picture. And so the stage set specifically in Deadhouse Gates is just one of mere introductions to one side of a lot of characters. And the book brings out a little bit of some other sides of some characters, but it's much later when a lot of that stuff is turned around, revealed, or just given greater perspective and scope. And so it's pretty amazing that this book can have such a almost self-contained story,
Yeah.
but yet be so like impactfully minuscule compared to the greater story, and impactfully necessary to the greater story.
Lacine is. I'm glad you brought her up, because actually that was one of the characters who I had a completely different perspective on, because I did go through the first time through and just think she was the worst. And my opinion is much more nuanced now, but I certainly feel that, like, I want to say I listened to or read an interview of Erikson kind of talking about how sometimes you have people who are, otherwise like intelligent and, maybe not like completely morally bankrupt, but because of a series of, you see this actually in like history a lot of the time, where you'll have these kings or emperors, whoever, who are not like terrible. Like they're like, they're like fairly pragmatic, and they have some moral backbone, but because of the wild events beyond their control, they kind of get screwed over. And so I do pity Lacine in that regard. However, I feel like she kind of perfectly maps on, in my mind, to Felison as someone who is an extremely tragic character who has been dealt a really bad hand and is maybe intelligent, but nonetheless makes mistake after mistake constantly at almost every turn. I mean, knowing the full where both of their arcs go, they both just constantly are messing up, and they do very little to help them. Arguably the most Felison helped herself was by kind of accepting Drishna in the Whirlwind Goddess. But that also is arguably her biggest mistake, because it's really what sets her up to die. At that point, there's really no other option. I don't think it's clear at the end of this book, but I think by the end of House of Chains, it becomes clear that once she accepted that, there was nowhere else she was going but down. And it's sad. And Lacine, likewise, once she took the throne, she was going to fall. I just don't think she was made to be emperor.
No,
I don't think she has the qualities for that, what that empire needed in that
especially when you
moment.
get even more of her backstory in the sequel, the prequels by Esselon.
Nice. Okay. She gives me the sense of like someone who, again, is shrewd in some sense, but fails to really see the big picture when she thinks she's seen the big picture. And I think part of the big picture is noticing things that are happening outside of your immediate control and considering the ramifications of your actions. And so, she doesn't work well or hard enough trying to mediate with the previous generation, for example, all of her colleagues, really. And she doesn't really know how to handle, like, she clearly has an eye for talent, but she also encourages a lot of like bad behavior and corruption. And, I'm not like directly, but indirectly, by not like clamping down on it. She very much is kind of that assassin master, the claw master, like that. That's the type of leader that she can function as and do well. And as soon as she had to be like the actual head of the empire, she just wasn't up to the task. Hey, Shannon,
Hey,
can you hear us?
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
We heard a little drumming or something going on. Yeah. We're just talking about Lacine. We were talking about Felison and then Tavor and Lacine now, with full series spoilers. Just going through the 10 books, and yeah, it was just expressing how I have definitely a different perspective on Lacine, a much more nuanced perspective than I did the first time through. That said, I feel like she's a terrible empress and is just not fit for the task.
I agree. Like, I get why she took it over now. Like, I think, like later on we get a better idea of like the why she thought that Kellen Ved wasn't doing a good job and took it from him. But yeah, she's terrible.
I think just like, again, as evidenced by like she should not have lost to Malik Rel. Like, that's crazy. That she essentially set herself up to like get cooed and let a slimy frog like Malik Rel take over. Like, that's crazy. How do you miss that low hanging fruit? But she just like, she had such such tunnel vision. She viewed the world through a very particular lens and could not see past it. Like, she's the claw master, and she's probably was excellent at that. And then the instant she had to deal with things beyond assassins, she just wasn't up to the task.
Interesting. Is that? I mean, I know there's that scene in, what is it, Bone Hunters, when she is basically bowing down to everything Malikrel says, but I feel like I don't know much about her. I didn't develop a clear picture of her over the course of the 10 books enough to have an opinion on her at all, other than maybe distantly hating her for sending Felicin to her death. But and also the stuff about Coltane, right? That she bows down to in Bone Hunters, where they're happy to spread the misinformation that whatever bad situation they are in right now, which, oh my god, it it didn't feel, it just felt, it feels so much more real now when I think about it because of my recent interest in Indian politics. But anyway.
You do get a good chunk of her story in Return of the Crimson Guard.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's one of the two of those books I've read.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, does Varsha, do you know how she dies? Is that actually in the main series, or is that just in?
I think they just
No,
know
I
that
think
she dies.
I think we're just
That's what
told in the
Okay.
10th book that if I, again, hopefully I am not. Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, in the 10th book we find out that Malikrel is emperor now and Lasine is dead. We find this much out in the 10th book.
Okay, I kind of remember. That's what I thought. Was it just kind of offhandedly, like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, by the way,
Yeah, it's given secondhand.
the empress is dead. There's a new emperor.
that place where
so
we
yeah,
start.
I was trying to bite my tongue, not really say too much, because
Okay.
I didn't think you knew too much, or people that only read the 10 books would know too much.
It's this is a funny like point to think about, that the Empire is the core of the story in the first half of this series. But as we get into the second half of the series, the actual Empire itself becomes less and less important. And it becomes much more focused on, the different cast of characters, particularly the Bone Hunters that we're locking into, right? And then in those last two books, like, the politics of the Empire don't matter at all. It does not come up, right? Like, that it's an offhand mention. You find out the Empress was killed and replaced by Malik Rel, that little shit you met in Deadhouse Gates. Like, it's crazy to think that that's the case, but it's because, like, I think that is the perfect example for how little the Empire itself actually matters after a certain point in this series. That it's not the point of the series.
And that goes back to our discussion about Kellen, Ved, and Dancer, because the reason why they are where they are, even in Deadhouse Gates, even in Guards of the Moon, is because they saw a bigger picture.
Yeah.
Being emperor wasn't enough for him. And so we get introduced to these concepts slowly and surely. We get it, we find out in Deadhouse Gates that they are actually gods and that he was the emperor. But we get introduced slowly and surely as time goes on what their bigger plan was, and it wasn't just empire. It was more.
Absolutely. I mean, in some ways they wanted to heal the world, right? Like, that's I wouldn't say it's entirely noble, but certainly, the aspects with the crippled god like that, they knew what that was going to take, and it wasn't going to take, the Malazan Empire. In fact, it was the Malazan Empire would stop them from being able to do that, which is one of those things that's like kind of mind blowing when you figure out the whole context, and also makes their initial actions like that much more baffling. I want so badly whenever we get to talk to Erikson, which I don't know when this is coming out relative to everything, but we have had to delay our interview with Steven Erikson, so I imagine this will come out before then. But like, why the fuck did that massacre happen at the start of the Gardens of the Moon? I cannot wrap my head around it. I don't understand the political motivations there, or how that relates to their larger plan. To me, it just seems like needlessly cruel. Like, fuck you, Lysine, fuck you, Malazans, and if that's what it is, great. But I just want to be like very clear if this is just like, if there's actually any larger picture, big picture stuff going on there. Because
Which
that's
one?
the one part of their plan that I cannot wrap my head around. In the start of Gardens of the Moon, the massacre, literally like how we open in like chapter, is that chapter 1 or 2?
Yeah, I
Oh,
think
you
I
mean
think it's the first chapter.
One.
the
Yeah.
noble quelling in Malaz City?
No,
No,
no, no,
the
no, no.
unleashing of the hounds on the army on.
Well, but in
Yeah. When they take Sorry.
in the mouse quarter, is that what it was?
No, no, no,
Oh,
not
no,
the
that's the
prologue.
prologue.
Oh, okay, all right,
Yeah.
all right.
The first chapter, opens with Sorry, before she's sorry, when she's just the fisher girl speaking to the witch, and then the witch is like, I'm going to possess you to save you because you're about to get possessed. And then, Kellenved and Dancer show up, and they set off the hounds on the Malazan army, and indirectly on all the innocent civilians nearby as well.
Mm.
And then Dancer decides pretty spontaneously that he's going to possess Sorry. He kind of sees a way to use her. And
Yeah, I'd be
for the
curious
life
to
of
know if
me,
Erikson
Please,
had
Shannon.
it all planned out, like where he was going with them, because it doesn't seem like it in that first book. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
Cotillion, like, because there's already kind of sprinklings about growing Cotillion a lot further than he was, but
I think
Shadowthorn just seems like a vindictive asshole.
I think that, well, a couple things. I do think Shadowthrone is a vindictive person. Like, I feel like that's a trait that remains consistent throughout the whole series. Like, he takes things personally. All that said, I do get the sense that Erikson had the idea that he was going to take these gods who initially seem like bad guys and kind of be about, show them finding their humanity again. Like, I do think Cotillion's arc there, which is one of the kind of through lines of the whole series, I think was intended from the beginning. But their larger plan, that's a good point, Shannon. I wonder if the larger plan relating to the crippled god and everything, if that was something he found as he wrote the books.
So it is implied that Tavor is also a Talon, right? Am I remembering this correctly? That she's also a member of the Talon, which means that maybe Cotillion / Dancer recruited her when she was very young to this task of saving the crippled god. So I thought that was interesting in the context of we were discussing during our non-full series spoiler discussions of about Bowden and how did Tavor get access to be able to hire someone like Bowden, a Talon, right? And maybe she has always been one since she was very
Yeah.
young. So maybe she got recruited as early as this book to go do the things she did in Dust of Dreams and Cripple God.
That's an interesting point,
Wow.
right? Yeah, that she was potentially always in on this and always part of the plan. Because I guess that's something that I was curious about as we were reading, trying to figure out when Tavor knew what, and like when she and when she was officially part of the plan versus when she was not. And that's a good point, that possibly before even the start of the series, she's already in on it and is already in Dancer's pocket.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because if she's in on it, then maybe there was a greater purpose to letting the hounds loose than we think, and that also led to what needed to be done in a very cold way in order to set events in motion to get puzzle pieces where they needed to be.
I do wonder if
Something to ask them about.
yeah, if it was like at that point they had kind of lost the big picture, shortly after ascending, and had just been consumed by vengeance. Because you think about it, like Apsalar, when she's sorry, when she's possessed, she's just a tool to get to Lysine and kill Lysine. That's her purpose. And so, like, given that, it kind of seems like they, I'm sure they have other stuff going on, but that they really are kind of just lashing out and maybe doing that kind of classic Greek god, ancient, like polytheistic, like a lot of, those older like mythologies, the gods are like careless about people. They don't really care. They're literally a higher level being. So like in the same way we view, rats or ants, they're like, whatever, like, oh, some get killed while I'm like lashing out at some of these rats that like not quite killed me, like, I, maybe that's it. Maybe it's as simple as that it's not even like this deep, complex plan. It's just like, I don't see them as people. So fuck them, loose the hounds on them.
Could be. They're definitely not infallible by any means.
No.
But it is surprising that people who start like this go on to do something so compassionate towards the end of the series. And that seemed to be something that potentially was being planned again as early as in these two books, right? The first two books. So yeah, I'm curious too about that. That did I think I have the same question, Carl, about what the purpose of that massacre is. And
Because it's a striking way to open the book. So like from a narrative, like hook the reader, like I get why it's there.
yeah,
But like with the context of the full series, it's kind of a what's going on? Like we know who these characters are now. Like why are they doing this? Like for characters who are normally so intelligent and their schemes are so multi-layered, that's like a shotgun blast.
I think
there's nothing subtle about that.
Yeah, but I think there is actually plenty of spots during the whole series where their schemes always they change and they adapt and things don't always go right for them.
For sure.
And their Shadow Throne is kicking aside a shadowy rat or something in frustration and in his warren there, and so he's definitely yelling and screaming a lot and stamping his foot and pulling tantrums for things that are not going right. So
Yeah.
who knows what their plan was? Maybe this was one of those tantrums, that initial massacre. Because he's definitely shown that he has them throughout the series. So that could be just part of the growth of his character, that because he has tantrums, I think, more than Cotillion does. I think sure. Cotillion is he definitely is more measured. And Cotillion admitted making a mistake by possessing Sorry later on, and you definitely see that growth in his character as the series progresses.
This isn't even a full series spoiler, but just like on the topic of Deadhouse Gates, and I'll need to bring this up in our regular just Deadhouse Gates into book discussion, but I love how the big moral moment, the big character moment for Cotillion is adopting all of these poor victimized children, which is of course in perfect contrast to how he's introduced victimizing a little girl.
Hmm.
It is just a beautiful moment of like transformation and action, right, and compassion. And I think, Varsha, you touched on something that I do feel like we talk a lot in the fan community about the power of compassion and how that's like one of the main themes of the series. But I think very specifically, the way Erikson likes to explore it is that compassion often comes from unexpected places. And the people who are maybe treated by society as a lost cause or have done unimaginable terrible things like Ikariam, or basically anyone you would normally oftentimes write off as a villain, as incapable of good, or if they do it, it's going to be motivated by some sort of self-interest, right? It's not really going to be truly good. I think Erikson has this immense, at least as of the writing of the series, this immense hope in humanity, that even people that we might consider the worst among us, or just morally kind of living in the dregs, are capable of profound compassion and selflessness. And I think that is a beautiful thing, because I think it is very easy in real life and in fiction to write off people and kind of say, no, they've gone too far, they are irredeemable. And the struggle is figuring out where that line is, like at what point is it not just impractical, but it's immoral to keep giving someone a chance, or to give someone the opportunity to live or do something selfless for someone else. Like, not to, I'm gonna do the classic internet thing and bring up like Hitler, right? Kind of, it seems like low hanging fruit in terms of like, probably we wouldn't like try to rehabilitate Hitler. You know what I mean? Like, if that great guy Hitler hadn't taken Hitler out, I think we probably would have, he would have been executed. And so like, where is that line? And it's particularly troubling with characters like Ikarian, who have committed genocide, but are pitiful figures, right? Because he's he's cursed. He doesn't mean to do the things he does. And what do you do, with that?
It also raises the question of whether intention matters, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he is doing horrible things, but the lack of memory of it all is interesting. Ikariam is a very, very interesting character. But since we brought him up, I had one full series spoiler thing in his regard. So the comparison or parallel you drew, Carl, before about between Ikariam and human civilization in general, and then the question that came up during our discussions about whether we should lock him up and not let him loose in the world. That's essentially what the folk rulers are setting out to do, right? Destroy the human race, because hey, we've done such horrible things, we don't deserve to live anymore. And
Great point. Yeah.
that is the point that um that I guess what they're trying to prove, that there is this element of compassion left. Like we deserve to live, or we're going to fight for it by showing the better side of ourselves, right? That's essentially what happens towards the end of the 10 books. So I thought that was such an excellent parallel that you drew, because that's exactly the moral question that is explored in the later books. And
Fantastic
Ikariam
point.
raises the same questions.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that, of how the four cruel cell are basically, asking that exact same question and coming to the point of, no, you have to clamp down on it. You have to shut it down, take it down. They are not redeemable. There's no reason to keep them around. They keep making the same mistakes. They keep doing the same shit over and over again. And so they do not deserve to live. And as a very humanist work, this naturally, the Book of the Fallen does not fall on their side. They are the bad guys, right? I'm so curious. Jarrod, have you heard about this? About like my reading of Ikariam in this book now? Like the I don't know that it's like correct or anything, but I'm very curious about uh,
Yeah, I
the
saw your
idea.
question, and I've listened to you guys talk about this in the past.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm just very curious if that was intentional on Erikson's part, of like that Icarium is kind of this like metaphor for civilization at large, and humanity as a mass, rather than any individual, right?
it's definitely a metaphor for humanity's um, willful ignorance of history sometimes,
Right, exactly,
because
exactly.
because we keep doing the same stupid things over and over again, and Icarium's also doing them over again, but it's for um, a different a different reason. His reasons for doing them over again are because he lacks the memory to do so. We kind of have a collective lack of memory when we're repeating ourselves throughout history, and I think that's a pretty cool
Exactly.
parallel you're making.
Yeah, it'll be fun to talk to. I hope Steven Erikson enjoys the conversation as much as I know we will. Hopefully we can bring some interesting questions, interesting insights for him, because he has given us so much to ponder. He's definitely an inspiration.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Shannon, were you going to add something?
No, I'm good.
Yeah, I saw you unmuted, so I wanted to make sure that if you were trying to speak, we got you. I have a new topic if we're ready to
Please.
move on from
Carry
that one. Felisin and Drishna. In book 4, I think by the end of the second book, she's all about vengeance against Tavor, right? And in book 4, we find out who the goddess of the apocalypse really is. Do you guys remember that? I forget his name, Onrak. Onrak, she's Onrak's jilted wife because he did a painting of her name starts with K, and she's Stulan's sister.
Is it Kulava?
Mhm.
Yes, Kilava.
Is that it?
Yeah.
He does a painting of hers, and he's very clearly in love with her. And so the wife, the jilted wife, she's on this track of vengeance for however many years. I think 300,000 years now. I think we
Wow.
zoom in and in and in into, like, I distinctly remember this image of like this dead woman's head, like the skeleton, the Tilanama's head, and she's just filled with vengeance. So I like Felicin's thoughts about vengeance. It parallel, like scaled out to
Yeah.
to Drishna's need for vengeance against all of humanity, because apparently like humanity in this world has descended from Kilava's children, and Onrak and Kilava's children, at least according to her, they are. So she wants to destroy all of humanity, which is just this. I think is a really interesting exploration, I guess, of the harm of vengeance. Like, it's not something that hasn't been done before, but like the scaling up of that is done so brilliantly, and to do that through Felicin as the vehicle for it, I thought was brilliant.
On that top, thank you for mentioning that, because I had forgotten that, and I remember that she's like one of the, like, is it the 6 or the 7, right? Or are those separate gods
I think
that are
they're
on the
separate
They're
from
separate.
her.
Those
I
are
don't,
separate.
yeah.
Okay, I'm mixing up. See, there's so much to remember. But thank you for mentioning that. And on that topic, I was reminded, I forget where, if it was maybe it was in the Fallen Ascent book, that opening prologue, I can't believe this hadn't like clicked for me, is showing you the Malazan Empire's version of the whirlwind. That this ruthless, animalistic, mass slaughter of people. They, for whatever reason, they could be anything. It doesn't matter who they are, really. They're the enemy, right? And so they are not human. They are not deserving of mercy or compassion, and they just get wiped out in mass. And it really is all, I think it does stem from this retributive urge inside us. And I think it, like, that is a group, the Malazan Empire, we are invited through the way we talk about empire, both within the series and outside of it, to view it as like they are like more civilized. Like they are the civilization. They're that stand-in, and yet they have the same instincts as these smaller tribal groups, right? And there's ultimately no difference about what's motivating them or what they're doing. And there's this idea that Lacine kind of presents, which is like, you have to do this. You kind of have to let out all the tension somewhere. But I think it, and who knows whether or not that's true, this kind of co-opting of our worst instincts in mass. But it touches on, I think, the futility of retributive justice, that when you make it about, when it's okay to say one person has to die, and it doesn't matter how awfully they die, they've committed crimes so heinous, or their very existence is immoral, and they have to die, it becomes very easy then to systematize that and say, no, a whole group of people or many people, have to die, whether it's nobles or, invaders or the locals or whoever, this particular ethnic group, right? And so that the very like acceptance of retributive justice has this profound impact over generations, right? Like you said, it's like this one woman's spite has created this literal whirlwind, and she's not alone in that, right? It's this idea that, like, again, that drive for retribution that we all can feel inside of us. Lord knows I have felt it. I've been feeling a lot lately, to be honest. And I think you come against danger, the danger of that, which is that it, even in that one, like, even if you think, okay, that one person, like, maybe they really deserve it, but then it just opens up the door for it to become about so much more than that one person, and it just never stops.
It's kind of interesting how we get introduced to this concept in Deadhouse Gates, that these ultra powerful being, this whirlwind who's been around a long time, basically superhuman, wants to wipe out humans, and then correlate that to what eventually becomes the Fork Sale, who wants to wipe out humans. And so we're introduced to that concept that these beings, whatever their origins are threatened by human beings' existence on this world. And like you were saying with the Malazans are the ultimate congregation of that threat, because of how successful they've been, but also how they are not like they're not susceptible to the whims of these more powerful beings like humans have been in the past. And I think that ups the threat level to these powerful beings, even Rake, and even Khaled Brood and all those other ascendants and stuff like that. There's, the Malazans have reached this point where they become a bit more threatening to these power camps, or these balances that exist. Why do later on do the Tista want to come in and take care of those pesky Letheri people? It's that we really get hammered home with that in this book, and I think that's part of carrying on past it too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's a lot in this book that has sort of echoes or reverberations in later books, which I thought was very interesting, especially with regards to Tavor's arc. So I know we talked about how Lorne is set up as a counterpoint to Tavor's character later on, but she takes up Coltane's role in later books, right? So the all the things about how the soldiers were Coltane's, there were several passages which like we are his now. That has echoes to Bone Hunters when they say like they're no longer of the Empire, they are yours now. You've named them. I thought that parallel was interesting. I mean, Tavor's obviously paralleling Coltane in some ways, like with the whole scene where what's the kid's name? Bolt? Not Bolt, sorry. Grub. Grub. Um, comes and stands it like with some bones or whatever, right? Like that whole scene where they read it as a bad omen. So she is definitely paralleling Coltane, but it feels like Coltane almost instantly or effortlessly has the affection of his soldiers, or maybe we didn't see the process of his earning their affection, but with Tavor we got to see it, and I thought that was brilliant, how we built up to it over time. There's also just the sheer
Awesome point.
thanks. The sheer dreariness of the chain of dogs, which again we go back to the bone hunters march through the desert, and the snake. Those
The
so
snake.
yeah, just it feels like a lot of the themes and situations that are explored in this book, they are sort of twisted or stretched. Like I'm thinking of like geometrically different shapes, is like stretched or scaled up in the later books, which is really interesting. Like they're so similar yet so different, and I
Mhm.
love the revisiting of it all, and yeah, and the hammering home of the points while also
Yeah.
exploring different things.
That's such a cool point that we do Tavor. We get to see her go from hated to the people around her to them like worshiping her, like
Mhm.
seeing her, making her this iconic figure, just like Coltane.
Yeah.
And
Exactly. Yeah.
that's such a great insight I hadn't fully considered.
Yeah.
Like you said, we the obvious parallel is Lorne in book 1, but Coltane in book 2 as well. We have all of these stand-ins.
Yeah.
Maybe Whiskey Jack will be book 3. I'm gonna have to like really read into that, right? Where Tavor's shadow falls upon all of these characters. So I have a question for you. This was one I actually meant to bring up earlier as we were talking about Lacine. Who do you feel like would be a good candidate to be in charge of the Empire? Who do you think would actually be fit to the task in this time period?
Well, depends on what you want. Do you want an
That's fair. Yeah.
inspirational leader, or do you want an administrator?
Well, who do you think will make the Empire be as successful and as peaceful as possible? Because I do think that is an underlooked aspect. You need someone who creates stability, which does mean that they have to be willing to do certain ruthless moves, but
Mhm.
also you have to be really smart about it, because ruthlessness is so often treated as inherently pragmatic, where often it can alienate people and foment rebellion and things like that. So who do you think could create stability, I guess, is the goal, right? If you think of the Malazan Empire as like, and empires in general as kind of governments in general, as essentially like trying to create stability within a group of people and to, hand out resources and allow the free flow of those resources, who do you think would maximize that potential in the Empire? Like my instinct was kind of Tavor, but I do wonder if she is too military minded to actually manage the administrative aspect of it, and that you would see a similar sort of flaw like you did with uh, Lacine, who was such an assassin that she felt like the answer to everything was assassination, you know? And so I'm wondering if
I
Tavor.
still,
Please, Shannon, what's
I
up?
think I was gonna say I think of that one epigraph that's in, I think it's in book 4 about Grub, and I really hope one day we get to see Grub wrest control of the Empire from Rel and become
I'm on board.
the emperor they deserve.
I'm on board with
But
that.
what if the to your question that you're asking, is Malik Grell.
I refuse to. Okay, I know there are a number of books I
don't
haven't
accept
read.
that.
I know there are a bunch of books that are going to explore him and how he functions as emperor, and I'm sure he in some ways is very competent. But someone who is just so morally bankrupt and out for himself, I cannot get behind.
What if our
I need someone
perspective
who
gets
has.
changed somehow, though?
Okay, fair. If his perspective gets changed, if he changes fundamentally as a person, fair. But I'm thinking like in these 10 books, let's say in these 10 books,
No, you
who do
won't
we
see that
feel
in
like,
these 10 books.
yeah, who do we think in these 10 books would make the best emperor? Or, empress, obviously, open to any gender.
Tehol.
Toho.
I don't disagree. Actually, yeah.
He was a good king. Tehol the
Yeah.
only.
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Tehol the Only is probably is the right pick. That's a good point. If we can just swoop him up, put him on the throne. Otherwise, I don't know how this would play out, but I feel like Rake might be a good emperor.
Mm.
He leads his people pretty well. He's been leading them for hundreds of thousands of years. I just feel like, and he doesn't want it, which I think in an ideal world, you want an emperor who does want it because they want to use power for good. But the next best thing is someone who doesn't want it, because they have a decent moral compass. And so if you force them in the position, they will try to do right, and I think Animander has a cold aspect to him where he can be ruthless if he needs to be. He can be pragmatic.
Mm.
He wouldn't have lived this long otherwise. And
But
obviously he dies
in
at
true
the end
series
of book
spoiler
8.
fashion,
But
he's not an
yeah,
option.
yeah. I obviously that's by the end of book 10, right? But
Well,
for the
maybe if he had
majority of the
become emperor,
series,
he wouldn't have
right?
died.
Exactly. Like if he's like kind of one of the big enemies for the Empire, and so what if he did what their cousins, the Tista Dir did, and the Tista Andi just take over the Empire and adopt their ways.
It didn't work out so well though, long ago.
Yeah, but
part of me wants to say the only
Mad King. I mean,
part of me wants to say the only true answer here was robbed from us, and that was Beak. Beak could have been emperor.
Beak.
Interesting.
Beak definitely could have been a symbol. The actual running of the empire. I don't know. Like if this is like one of those like Chinese empires where like the emperor is just like a figurehead, and it's like the administrators are the ones, the bureaucrats are the ones who do things. Like I think Beak could be that emperor. I'm with you there, but that's not how the Malazan Empire functions.
Yeah, right.
All right. But as far as Deadhouse Gates go, Tolbukai.
You think he would?
So?
Interesting idea. I feel like he would fall into similar traps to Lysine, where he would
not as emperor, but what do we think about his?
Okay. That's very, very different. Very different.
Yeah.
Yes.
There we go.
I had a moment of his Jarrod, okay?
Yeah.
Emperor Karsa.
I don't think he wants it, but
his gal, I think maybe could be a decent empress. I'm blanking on her name right now.
Yeah, I was thinking of her too. Wait, she has an Indian sounding name. With an S. Oh man, I forget.
I really one thing I got out of this reread with Karsa, though, I will say, or Tolbukai, is when he got to read the Book of Drizhna, and I thought that was really impactful. Some of the stuff that he read in there that relates to his kind of future and what we learn about him later on. With
he wasn't happy.
What all was it? It was like, because it talks about. Does it talk about like the I can't remember their names. The spirits that are like he's dragging around with him or whatever.
Yeah, his buddies.
Yeah.
It
does. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some good stuff in there. Really good stuff.
This is way better on a reread because I did not like Tolbukai. I was just like, oh, giant savage character, blah, blah, blah. Like, I did not give a shit about him. And then it blew my mind when I realized that guy was Karsa Orlong the entire time in book 4. And I was like, what? And so I was really excited to get it, like, dive into that. And his
In one of
behavior
our
makes a lot of
episodes,
sense.
I accidentally referred to him as Karsa, and I'm like really hoping nobody catches that.
No one will know what it means, though, right? Like,
Yeah.
no one will know what it means.
Yeah.
All that does is, worst case scenario, spoil the person we start with in the beginning of book 4 is him. So I don't think it'll ruin it.
It was
I
just
love
interesting
Karsa.
though, because he was he's another one of these characters from the ancient races, and that has generally more power personally than humans do. And he's there. He's on the whirlwind side. He's protecting the whirlwind, and he fails. These pesky humans once again come in, kill the whirlwind on his watch, and he fails. Yet another reason to wipe these pesky humans out.
They're so uppity,
Yeah, I know.
Like rats, enough of us can do whatever damage can be done.
Yeah.
So once again, we're focusing on that aspect of all these other races and creatures. They're not liking what the humans are doing on this world at all.
I feel like this maybe leads into what one of my questions for Steven Erikson is, which is, I am shocked on this read through now, like, with the full context to everything, about how secular the Malazan Empire is, like, relatively, particularly compared to empires in, like, real life. And I think that is a key part of the thematics here of, like, they're kind of embodying that sort of secular technological, like, drive to progress, both for good and bad. And that's why we're so dangerous in this world, right? Is we've killed who knows how many animal species and plant species, right? And so they should be afraid of humans, because humans will do insane things and are, despite the fact that we self-destruct in a lot of stupid ways, are very good at cooperating with one another in a way that a lot of other species are not. We have this weird combination of, like, tool making, like, intelligence, and also, like, cooperation, which is what led us to us creating these, like, giant civilizations we have now. And yeah, I mean, they should be fucking terrified.
Yeah, and the thing is, we see we see the of course the Malazans have technology. They got the munitions and stuff like that. But they also have getting a better handle on magic as well than in the past. Their mages are the biggest example being Quick Ben, of course, but even some of the other mages are tapping into power that all these other powerful races are surprised to find out about when they do. And so it's that that we see that. We saw that, of course, in the Gods of the Moon with Pale and Tayshrin and all that stuff, but we start to see it more in here too, so it's pretty cool.
I will say Tayshrin, talking about someone you have a different view of, do feel bad for him. He got fucked. Like, horrible luck, and then became, persona non grata, like the number one enemy of the bridge burners, because of shit that he was just trying to stay alive, like, he's the one who got backstabbed, and it led to just horrible calamity.
Wait, explain that to me. I think I still don't understand it. How he was still throwing fire at some of the mages, right? Who were the backstabbers?
Nightchill.
Nightchill
was tried to kill him. He defended himself, and in the resulting sorceress conflagration, as Steven Erikson loves to write it, he accidentally blew up a bunch of the bridge burners and a bunch of the other high mages.
Interesting. And what's Nightchill's deal?
She's like a goddess, right? She's an ascendant.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, she might be one of the the Azaph, or one of the
Yeah.
one of those
Interesting. How did
an
I miss
ancient
this?
being, a very ancient being.
Well,
How
in
did I miss
Deadhouse,
this?
they
Where do we find
they
this out?
don't
It's
they tell us
mentioned
about
in
Tayshian
here, I
in
believe.
Device,
Deadhouse?
maybe?
Yeah.
It's
At the
mentioned.
end, when Lasine tells Kalam about Tayshian, because that's one of Kalam's arguments against her, and she's like, "Listen, Tayshian was just defending himself. Nightshield tried to kill him, and unfortunately, the resulting sorceress backlash led to Bridgeburners dying."
Interesting. I
In
missed
Nightshield,
that.
we
I
learn
have
more
to
about
totally
her
read
in the
that
next
section.
book.
Yes, we don't have her motivation
'Cause,
yet. I can't remember why. Yeah, that
I
I
think
couldn't tell you.
doesn't Spite and Envy talk about Nightshield or something? One of them.
That sounds right. She's really long lived though.
Yeah, we'll learn about her and her connections all the way back to Draconis and all of that at
Yeah,
some point, or at least a little bit of
Oh,
it.
wow, she's that
Yes.
ancient. Okay.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
she's
Yes.
just like chilling there, trying to kill Tayshian. What?
Yeah.
Well, she was keeping
Okay.
an eye on
Her
those pesky
motivation,
humans.
yeah, yeah. I'm curious to pick up on stuff like that I definitely missed on the first time, just because there was so much going on.
Yeah, I definitely missed the information about her in the conversation between Kalam and Lasine. I've got to go back and reread that. But how did I miss something so interesting?
Did we all get that? I mean, we should mention this in our proper Deadhouse Gates talk, but Lasine was never even there. I
Yeah,
love that
that
it's
was cool.
just this
Yeah.
ploy the whole time. Like, that's brilliant. Like that, I had to like her a little bit at the end of that when she does that. I'm like,
And then for half a second, they make us think maybe Kalam changed his mind, and then it's like, oh no, it's just because she was
No.
never there.
yeah,
He had no chance at killing her.
yeah,
So,
it's so good.
So yeah, no, I don't want to put in the effort to try and find her again. I'm done. She's
Yeah.
convinced me.
Valid. After how much of a shit show it was the first time, like, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I really love about that gets set up for later stuff, you guys touched on it earlier, with Coltane and the whole chain of dogs, is we're kind of watching in real time as we're reading it, this creation of an all-new mythology
Yes.
around Coltane. And
Yes.
that is like, it's so cool because it's the way he succeeds in bringing out, crossing the desert, bringing out getting the refugees there, saving them, getting betrayed, basically. The way he goes out, the whole crow thing and all that stuff, and possibly, we get a little hint he maybe have been reborn in a kid at the end, but that is almost a classic mythological tale that we saw unfold in real time in this book that has echoes for the rest of the series. That when it has echoes, like you said earlier, Varsha, with the snake, and it has and with the way that I forget who it was. Somebody had died or later on in the series that had a similar feel to the crows dispersing and stuff like that, and the and also Lasine's story as she leads her army across the desert, of course, echoes what Coltane did, and it was almost like these characters were somewhat pre-prepared mentally to take on that aspect of the mythology they already knew from Coltane's drive through Deadhouse Gates, and that's just how important that whole chain of dogs was. It's just so cool.
I was all in on the chain of dogs this time. That was, it was the thing where after I read it the first time, I was like, people love it. Like, I don't get it. The way it ended, like, awesome, great storytelling, but like, I just did not connect with it this time. All in. I adored it. It was like, fuck, maybe my favorite part of the book.
Yeah.
So good. And Coltane, I worship at his altar. That's for sure. I will say also a little bit of sidebar. Another reason to read the new books, No Life Forsaken, the second Witness book, I think is going to include Coltane Reborn. We know it's going to deal with the cults. We're back on Seven Cities in the second book, and I think we have every reason to believe that we may meet the little boy who is Coltane Reborn. So that's a reason to
Interesting.
check it out.
Or girl, right?
Because
Or
it
girl,
is
yeah.
like what's it called again? The God is Not Willing
mhm.
is like 15 years later.
Mm.
Yeah, so yeah, that's very possible that we're gonna run into something like that on Seven Cities. Yeah.
And it's already and Cripple God is already several years after the fall,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
so riddle me this: the kid Grub, who I think is the child that Dwaker hands off to Kennep, right? And
Mhm.
and he basically adopts the kid, and he's the one who creates the fuss for Tavor later with by standing in a place with some bones or whatever. We are, at least I thought, he says he has no memories from before Coltane's death, and I think the whole conversation he has with, I forget the scary kid's name, the other one who can do magic, who came out of the fire of Yagatan.
Panic?
Mhm.
Sin?
Is it Panic?
Sin.
Sin.
There we
Sin.
go.
I
Yeah.
think so.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sin.
So she what was I saying? Yeah, I thought at that point that we were getting heavy hints that he is Coltane Reborn, except that can't be true because we saw the crows go to this woman who was
Mhm.
carrying a child.
Yeah.
So what is up with the relationship between Grub and Coltane? My current theory is that one stray crow came and inserted, like, left a part of his soul into Grub, and so he's there in spirit a little bit, but the main part of him is still being reborn.
I missed the grub of it all. It's crazy that on this read through I'd missed it again. I had to have you guys point it out to me. I just like that went right over my head. And I love Grub. It's crazy. He's one of my favorite characters in the last few books. But I'd like forgotten his. For some reason, I thought he like first appeared in Yucatan with Sin. I hadn't realized he came up this early.
Yeah.
Best boy, Grub.
And he goes on to become the best first sword or whatever title he holds.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So I
Mhm.
I thought there were all these heavy hints that he had some of Coltane in him. He's not Coltane Reborn. The timeline doesn't match, but I don't know. I like the crow theory. Random crow, lazy crow,
I'm-
didn't want to fly all the way.
it might be slightly less magical than that, and just that like Coltane for him was like it changed the way he viewed the world fundamentally. And so Coltane
Yeah.
it becomes this figure that is this god to him, maybe literally, who elevates him every step of the way, you know. He is an icon for that little boy, and that shapes the man he becomes.
That's fair, but I like the crow.
That's fair. That's fair. You know, you have a
I'm sure
stray
you're
crow.
right, but this is just like Hairlock is still alive. This
Oh yeah. No, we create our own lore here.
Yeah.
We the author is dead, and if the author isn't dead, I will kill him.
mummified authors.
Yeah, Steve.
Yeah. No, why did you think I wanted to get him on this? This is the opportunity.
You got some new tech. What was I going to say? I forgot. Gothos. I guess that was my next
Oh,
question.
yes.
So we meet him in, when is it? Toll the Hounds, when he hosts Kalor and Nimander and everyone in a little fireplace with like a cozy little house, feeds them food. So the room that we see off of the Azat house with the fireplace, do you think that's where he hosted them, or do you think he moved between Deadhouse Gates. This feels like such a silly thing to bring up in in comparison to some of the things we talked about today, but I got to know.
I think it's just there. I think that's
Well,
just his little cottage.
He's trapped in Azeth, isn't he? Like,
Yeah.
he can't leave.
That's true. So that cottage they entered. So those guys ended up in the Azad house somehow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
They went for
Okay.
that's what the Azeth houses are connected, and you can like move between them. That's what they were doing. That's why they were going there in the first place. Which I love that little sequence, how it's like a map on the ground and they like go through the map into the world is just so cool. And then fucking Iskarl Pust tricking them into thinking he'd like fallen through into this endless void or whatever, and he's just using illusion magic. That's my guy. I'm ride or die with Iskarl Pust.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And we're introduced to his wife, the queen.
Oh,
and
yes.
Absolute Aegon
I didn't
Magora.
realize that they met in this book.
I didn't
I
either.
thought they were like always together
Yeah.
until the end of this. I was like, oh, this is where they actually meet.
Yeah.
Because he was going on about the spiders at the beginning of this.
Right. Yeah, when he came hunting those spiders, I thought, oh, the wife is that. But I thought they were already married, and he's just had a fight with her.
Right.
But
What a great meet cute, you know?
yeah,
Very
it's-
very sweet, very romantic.
for some definition of cute, yes.
You know, he tried to smash her in
Yeah.
her spider form. It was very romantic.
Yes. And lastly, from my list, of course, we can talk about other things that you guys have, but wanted to talk about the themes of witnessing, right? Like how hard Tweaker works to make sure that he bears witness to the chain of dogs, versus the switch later on where Tavor tells them, we're going to do things that will largely go unwitnessed, but they're important and we have to do them anyway. And then the cripple goes like, she's just kidding, I'm going to witness. But then they do go into this without a witness. So I think, again, I guess this sort of set up for that exploration later on to establish the importance of witnessing here, to talk about how profound their lack of witnesses are for whatever they are going to do. I think the sort of proof by contrast, so to speak.
Mhm.
I think it's brilliant. Contradiction. That's the word.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Tying into that, it's cool seeing Blistig introduced here and knowing that he becomes the like, the rebel in the final books, and is like so annoying. And
yeah, same ditto.
He's like a good, like solid.
Like, oh, I hate you at the end.
I know, but he's like
Who?
a solid
Sorry?
dude here.
Who?
Blistig.
Oh yeah, Blistig. Yes, exactly.
He's a solid dude here. Like he's just doing his job. Like is trying to be like pretty moral and like, oh man, what a disaster the final like sequence of events is, and it's just you see it coming from a mile away. Oh my god, the G style, Malik Rel fucking playing everyone.
Oh yeah, that sucks. But yes, to your earlier point, it's not clear to me right now that he's doing this out of self-interest. It's just like, what the fuck does this guy want? What is he up to? And it's not clear because, and we'll talk about this for whoever's listening, we are recording this before we record the discussion for the final 3 chapters. That's why we keep bringing up what we will say in the main discussion. But also, we've been told a few times that he's Gistal. He has nothing to do with 7 cities. So to make us think that he's not going to betray anyone, and then like he just hands them over to the rebel army. That's horrible.
But of course, he's not on their side either.
No.
Like, Malik Rail's out for Malik Rail. It's crazy. Like if I was those people, I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him. It's once a turncoat, always a turncoat. On the note of things that we would talk about in our final discussion, but I think maybe we shouldn't, just because it's not confirmed in this book. The fate of Duiker. How did he survive? I missed that.
I guess it was the guild or something that came from Darujistan.
Yeah, he had that necklace that the guild had delivered to Coltane.
Right.
Coltane gave it to him. So then when he died, I think his soul went into that, because then at the end we get those guys that work for, I think they work for Baruch maybe, that are
yeah.
they're collecting it, and then that's when then he'll show up in Toll the Hounds over in Drujistan.
Right, because he distinctly is not there. That's if you're paying attention, you notice that he is missing, because he's not actually dead where he was dead before. So that's kind of the hint to readers, but
and the
it's
Marines
easy
were
to
looking
miss,
for him. They couldn't
right?
find his body.
Right.
I thought, I think I misremembered that they saved him from just dying, but actually he's dead and they brought him back to life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
I also misremembered that.
And
Yeah.
where did Coltane get that necklace? I forget.
it came
The
with the
Trigal-
Trigale Guild.
With the
The
guild.
Tri-Guild.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
On that subject also, I love this, and I think Erikson talked about it before in other interviews, but I love the levels of narrative structure in this, because Deadhouse Gates could theoretically be from Tweakers, like Tweaker telling us the story, because at the end of Memories of Ice, if I remember correctly, he runs into the leftovers of the bridge burners, and they meet him, and he's like, "Yeah, let me tell you a story," and
it's
he,
this one. Yeah.
yeah, and it's this one, and then Toll the Hounds is famously narrated by what's his name, Krupp. And then book 5 is Tralsengar telling everyone at the end of book 4, okay, here, I'll tell you this story because we got time to kill. And so I love that the narrators for a lot of these books are set up. And then, of course, like the whole series is the Crippled God.
That's what I wanted to ask about.
Yeah.
Why do you think the Crippled God wanted to tell this story? Deadhouse Gates.
Interesting.
Is it all just for setting the stage for Tavor? Why do you think?
From where she started, we have to start from the beginning. Yeah, that's interesting. That's a little How I Met Your Mother-ish. Mother-ish. I want to tell you this last story, but I'll start way back over there.
Right, because it is so disconnected largely, like it ultimately, he's not even in this. I think, that was one of my questions. Is the voice, the god laughing, is that the Crippled God that Duiker hears? Duiker like keeps hearing this god laughing. Is that the Crippled God towards the end of the book?
Interesting.
That was my thought, but I'm not sure.
My thought was it was Hood, but I'm not sure.
I just feel like Hood doesn't laugh at people.
I could easily change my mind.
Like Hood is like a very like quiet, somber, but like
we know he's a Jaghut though, so he definitely has a sense of humor.
Sure.
And speaking of, again, I didn't realize we find out about the peace-loving nature of the Jagged just so early in the series. I think a lot of that was sat home for me in the later book when that random dragon comes and gives someone, I don't know, Samardev or someone, a history, the people, Traveler and some other people, the history of the Jagged, and that the only thing they ever waged a war against was death itself, which I cannot believe I didn't think of it before, but it makes perfect sense that Hood is a Jagged, given that was the war they waged.
I'm excited. That's in the Carcanis books. I can tell you. Reading.
Oh,
I'm
interesting.
we're building up to it right now where I am in it.
Okay.
But that's a plot line in the books.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, it's
more
really cool.
more motivation to read those sooner rather than later. Any other topics to discuss? Sorry, Jarrod, you were saying.
There was one. Yeah, there was one topic. The boat with the heads, right?
Oh yeah.
And the
Silanda.
Mm-hmm. Salandra.
Yes.
Silanda,
yes.
I think. Yeah.
Of course, we find out later on, where that boat was from, and the significance, and you find out in Midnight Tides more about that boat and how it got tied into, but I'm trying to remember exactly what happens on, because it was that mage, right, who was freeing, who was there to get Heberick out and Fellison and
Colt.
to get them out of the
Yeah.
prison, and so he goes through this warren, and he's taking a whole boat with him, right? If I'm remembering correctly.
That's right.
And then something happens with the ocean and the water, and we're not quite sure. We don't know where it came from in Deadhouse Gates, and we find out, of course, much later in Midnight Times that it was Hanan Mosag doing his evil magic and all that stuff that caused that to happen. But I just I'm wondering what he was thinking when he was writing that part in here about, did he have that in mind? Yeah, I'm going to explain this 3 books later,
And it's not even just 3 books
Interesting
later,
idea.
right?
Yeah.
There's so many layers to that, because all the deadheads, I think that's Karsa, right? Or
Yep.
That's Parsa.
Yeah.
We find out about that in the book 4.
yeah, and so
Yeah.
We kind of get the end of the boat. It chronologically goes back. We start
Yeah.
with this. Book 4 will take us to Karsa on the boat, and then book 5 will take us back to how the boat got there to begin with. I
Yeah.
think, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
so many layers of
Just
mystery
crazy.
there. It has to have been something he planned. Because
Yeah.
Toblaka is there, and just the state that the boat was in. Yeah, my money would be on him having planned it out all the way back.
Tying into this, the Warren of Fire that, like, Golden Flames make all, Stormy and Gessler all bronze, briefly does the same for Bowden, heals Fellison's face. That's Starvel Dimmelane, right? Like, that's the Dragon Warren, right?
Then I thought it was still the Talon Warren.
I thought it was
Is it-
Talon.
Yeah,
the
is it
I think
Talon?
it's even explained later on. I don't remember when, but they say that they went to Talon, the Talon Warren, and it's the Warren of Fire, right?
Right, that makes sense. Okay. I thought it was because the dragon did it. But the dragon is
Also Talon.
Othara Ethel, right? And she is
Yeah.
Yeah,
she
she's
is the Talon
And then
Imaris
yeah,
goddess. So I guess
she's
it
a
makes sense
bone
that it would be
caster. Yeah,
Talon. Right.
yeah.
Oh, so
It's the
she was
soul
in here
taken
too.
bone caster.
Yes.
Ola
You
Ethel
don't
was
you
in
don't know
here?
that until much later. Yes, but
Oh,
she's
she's
much later.
Olar Ethel. What?
the dragon, the
Okay.
undead dragon.
Yeah, that's who the undead dragon
Who's the-
was.
I
she's
did not know
really
that. Oh,
yeah, she's not even really Talon Imaris. She is their goddess.
yes,
And
that's
yeah,
true.
she turns into a dragon, which it was the dragon aspect that made me think it was Starvel Dimmelane. But I guess if it is her, it's Olar Ethel, it does make sense that it's probably just Talon burning them magically.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's crazy to think Olar Ethel is
I know.
as early as book 2.
It is crazy.
Yes.
How many of
Truly
these
is.
things are just like flybys like that, one scene wonders, and then you find out how important they are, Like Night Chill, such a non-factor in book 1, but is actually this incredibly long-lived, historical ascendant, who has so much power. It's wild. This whole universe is wild.
And then that's going to continue to pay dividends down with Belderon and his connection to Silver Fox. And
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, that there was something
Mhm.
I was.
So it just kind of keeps going.
Yeah, I think I had to chuckle when in that Gardens of the Moon scene. Well, I guess Belladon's technically not possessing that child. It's just like 2 people. I was like, nope, third person, and the third person's coming back to bite you about 6 books from now.
Do you?
Yep.
I'm curious, knowing the arcs of the series. Like, what do you all? How did knowing Kalam's fate impact how you read his story? Same with like Fiddler and Crocus and Apsalar. I know with Crocus and Apsalar, I felt way more comfortable knowing that they get their happy ending. I was not convinced the entire series that was going to happen. So that kind of warmed my heart watching their relationship develop and them grow up. But likewise, Kalam, I always have felt like Kalam kind of got done dirty a little bit. I mean, this is a series that sometimes just like people just get taken out like he does. But it hurts knowing, right, that he's not going to like some immensely like glorious end.
I
But
actually
he
can't
does get to
remember.
be one of the
Go
bridge
ahead.
burners, gods of the dead or whatever at the end,
Right,
right?
in the final. No, you're right. That's right. That's true with all of them, I guess.
True, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, they kind of get their reward in the end. They also wage war on death, apparently. I didn't really think about that before.
Yeah. Great point tied into that. We texted about this during Gardens of the Moon, but we haven't mentioned this in one of our chats. The Mason of High House Death, there's a reading in the Deck of the Dragons. That's Whiskey Jack, Mason of High House Death. And later in the book, we find out he grew up and was a stonemason. And then, of course, we know he becomes kind of Hood's replacement, right? The bridge burners are.
Yep.
Awesome stuff like
That's
that. It's
really
just
great,
seated
yeah.
there right from the beginning.
Yep.
Well,
Excellent.
and not just like they're all Hood's replacement, but he's the Mason. He's like the builder. He's the
Right.
center of it, which is I think really works real well.
What other Deck of Dragons readings or foreshadowing have you guys noticed that is just excellent? What else? We've covered some already.
But well, real quick though, going back to what you said earlier, Carl, I did want to say actually knowing Fiddler's End, I think I enjoyed that because he's so prominent in this book. This is where he really steps out, and knowing that he's the one who kind of survives to the end. In fact, does the series end with him? Is like he's the last scene, like where he's fishing.
Isn't it Whiskey Jack and what's her name, Corlat, heading towards Whiskey Jack? But it is one of the last scenes. I don't know if it is the last.
Well,
scene.
one. Okay.
I remember thinking that this is a love story because of the way it ends.
I think it is the last scene. I think because I think it ends in like a parallel to Ganos' opening where someone, here's Fiddler, old as shit, being a fisherman, and he talks to this like kid who's like, I want to be a soldier, and he like tells him the same thing Whiskey Jack told Ganos or something like that. You'll grow out of it or something. And the parallel is just
yes,
juicy.
I am looking at the end of epilogue 2, and it's old man talking about Smileys.
Okay.
Yeah, that's got to be him.
Okay.
And then I think the scene right before that is what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah,
I'm curious about that. I'm curious about Memories of Ice. I've read Memories of Ice twice, and neither time have I been that into Whiskey Jack and Corlat's romance. So I'm curious to see if third time's the charm for me.
I was all in on that.
I agree.
Was one of my favorite parts of the book.
I felt it did nothing for me.
Interesting. You're dead inside. No, I'm just kidding. I love that. I mean, there's this broken man and this woman from a broken race. What is not to love about? They find each other. Come on, Carl. Give me some.
I just didn't feel the connection, but I like intellectually understood what was going on, but I don't know. Maybe this time it'll hit for me.
Okay.
I can't get around the fact that Whiskey Jack's a dumbass and should have just gotten his leg looked at and then he wouldn't have died.
Yeah, that's so true, though.
Not only does he die, sadly, he gets yelled at about it. Okay. Cool. I do have to head out. So any last thoughts before we wrap up?
This was fun. I mean,
Nice,
there's so much. There's always so much to talk about. I'm glad we got to talk about a lot of the thematic stuff.
Yes.
This is a nice little warm up before we talk to the man himself.
Yes, eventually. Cool. Yeah, this was excellent. Thank you, guys. And to anyone listening, I think this will probably go up after we put up the final discussion for Deadhouse Gates. So the next discussion you will see will be Memories of Ice. I think we're doing the first 2 or 3 chapters. I'll post the reading schedule on the pagechewing forum. Please consider joining us there for discussing these books or anything else that you're interested in out of the, 5 to 10 reading groups going on right now there. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you soon. Bye.